They did not lose you. They lost the only person who allowed them to feel like their true self. That truth did not arrive gently. It found them last night, quietly, suddenly, and without mercy. Silence has a strange way of removing every excuse. It is where the mind can no longer hide from what it already knows. At first, it was only a passing thought, a brief feeling they tried to ignore. They pushed it aside like they had done so many times before. But the subconscious does not negotiate. It does not rush. It waits patiently. It watches every decision, every excuse, every distraction. Then, when the moment is right, it brings everything to the surface. That is when everything became difficult. What they experienced was not simply missing you. It was the frightening realization that no one else had ever understood them the way you did. Not even close. You were never just another person who cared about them. You were the one who noticed the pieces they kept hidden from everyone else. Even more unsettling, you recognized the parts they spent years hiding from themselves. Most people never truly understand this. Love is not only about affection or attention. Real love is about being seen completely. It is about someone recognizing every layer of your personality without turning away. You offered them that kind of acceptance without judgment. That is rare. For someone who has spent years hiding behind emotional walls, it can even feel overwhelming. When another person truly sees you, they also notice everything you are trying to avoid. You notice the insecurity hidden beneath their confidence. You saw the fear beneath their need for control. You recognized the loneliness behind every distraction they use to keep themselves busy. Even after seeing all of it, you stayed. That changed something inside them. They developed feelings they did not know how to manage. They became attached, yet frightened at the same time. They wanted closeness, yet felt an urge to create distance. They desired connection, but every step toward intimacy also made them want to escape. Psychology describes this as a struggle between the conscious mind and the unconscious self. Their logical thoughts wanted connection. Their hidden fears wanted protection. They never gave this conflict a name. Instead, they simply felt uncomfortable and avoided whatever caused those emotions. Being ignored never frightened them. Being truly understood did. Being ignored feels familiar. It allows people to stay hidden behind the version of themselves they carefully present to the world. But being understood removes that protection. It exposes everything they spent years trying to conceal. They were never prepared for that kind of honesty. Without realizing it, they slowly damaged what they valued most. It was never one dramatic mistake. It happened through countless small actions. Replies became slower. Conversations became shorter. They pulled away without explanation. Arguments appeared over things that never really mattered. Moments that needed kindness were answered with distance. These were not random decisions. They were emotional defense mechanisms. Every time you came closer, they became more aware of everything unresolved inside themselves. Every conversation reflected something they had avoided for years. Old emotional wounds, childhood disappointments, the constant search for approval, the fear that they would never truly be enough. You did not create those feelings, you simply revealed them. That was difficult for them to accept. A part of them loved you deeply. Another part quietly blamed you for making those hidden emotions impossible to ignore. They carried love and resentment at the same time. Those opposite emotions slowly exhausted them. Imagine spending your entire life hiding from your own truth, then meeting someone who recognizes it almost immediately. Most people do not know how to stay in that situation. They run. That is exactly what happened. The painful reality is that running never removes the truth. It only postpones the moment they must face it. Every distraction only delays the inevitable. Every excuse buys a little more time. But eventually, the truth catches up. Last night, it finally did. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no tears, no emotional breakdown, no loud confession. Only a quiet moment when everything suddenly became impossible to deny. They looked around at their life. The conversations continued. The people around them smiled. Daily routines carried on exactly as before. Yet something felt completely empty. Everything lacked depth. Nothing felt genuine. And suddenly they understood why. It was never only your presence that they missed. It was your understanding. Nobody else looked beyond the surface. Nobody else challenged the stories they told themselves. Nobody else made them feel completely accepted while also encouraging them to confront the parts they wanted to avoid. That realization landed with incredible force. They did not simply lose someone they loved. They lost the only person who reflected their true self back to them. Without that reflection, they slowly became strangers to themselves. Now, every new connection feels incomplete. Every conversation seems shallow. Every laugh feels slightly forced. Once someone experiences real emotional depth, ordinary interactions rarely satisfy them in the same way again. They tried convincing themselves that you could be replaced. They repeated that belief again and again. Someone else will understand me. Someone else will make me feel the same. Someone else will eventually take your place. But the subconscious has no interest in comforting lies. It compares every experience, every conversation, every connection, every attempt to move on, and every comparison quietly reaches the same conclusion. Nobody understands them the way you did. That realization is difficult because it forces them to admit something they have avoided since the day everything ended. They did not lose you because life pulled you apart. They lost you because fear influenced countless small choices. Fear became distance, distance became silence, silence became separation. Now there is no simple way to reverse what happened, no opportunity to erase every mistake, no hidden second chance waiting quietly in the background. Only awareness, clear, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. Awareness changes everything because once the mind accepts the truth, it cannot return to pretending it never existed. Last night, that awareness finally reached them. Yet they still misunderstand one important thing. This is not only about regret, it goes much deeper than wishing they had acted differently. They are beginning to understand what your love revealed about them. Your presence exposed emotional wounds they never wanted to acknowledge. Your patience reflected insecurities they believed they had buried. Your acceptance challenged the belief that they were impossible to love. They were never prepared to receive that kind of love because they never believed they deserved it. Now that realization has begun unfolding inside them. It will not disappear overnight. Once the subconscious begins revealing what has been buried for years, it rarely stops halfway. The process has only just begun. What weighs on them now is not a passing feeling. It is not the kind of guilt that disappears after a few days or gets buried under new distractions. It is the kind that settles deep inside the chest and quietly becomes part of every ordinary moment. It follows them into silence. It stays with them during conversations. It waits for them at the end of every day. And the reason it has become so heavy is because they finally understand something they could never fully see before. You were never asking for more than they could give. You were offering a level of care, honesty, and emotional safety they did not believe they deserved to receive. Deep inside, they carried an old belief that they were not enough. They believed that eventually they would disappoint you. They believed that if you came close enough, you would eventually discover every flaw they worked so hard to hide. They convinced themselves that once you saw the parts they kept hidden, you would leave just like they expected everyone else would. So before that imagined moment could ever happen, they walked away first. It was not simply a decision. It was a defense mechanism. Their subconscious chose control over uncertainty. If they ended the connection first, they believed they could avoid the pain of being left behind later. In their mind, escaping early felt safer than risking genuine attachment. They confused self-protection with emotional strength, never realizing that both were built on fear rather than truth. But life has a strange way of exposing the consequences of choices made through fear. The painful irony is impossible for them to ignore now. They spent so much time trying to protect themselves from abandonment that they became the person who abandoned someone else. They feared rejection so deeply that they created the very experience they wanted to avoid. Now they have to live with that contradiction every single day. They were not rejected, they rejected. They were not misunderstood. They refused to be understood. They were not unloved. They pushed away someone who was willing to love beyond appearances, beyond perfection, beyond the carefully constructed image they showed the world. That realization has become impossible to escape. It is followed by another emotion that feels even heavier. Regret. Not the dramatic kind people express for a moment before moving on. This regret grows quietly. It settles deeper over time. It changes the way they remember everything. They replay conversations differently now. They notice details they ignored before. They recognize kindness they once dismissed. They finally understand the value of what they had only after it disappeared. Because now every interaction with someone new quietly reveals what is missing. People speak to them. People listen. People show interest. Yet something always feels incomplete. They hear conversations, but they do not feel genuine understanding behind the words. They see effort, but it lacks the quiet, emotional recognition they once experienced without either of you trying to force it. Everything feels rehearsed. Everything feels like people are playing roles instead of revealing who they truly are. Once someone experiences authentic emotional connection, ordinary interactions often lose their ability to satisfy the same emotional need. They have tried convincing themselves otherwise. They filled empty hours with noise. They stayed busy. They met new people. They started conversations. They searched for excitement. They surrounded themselves with distractions. For a while, it looked like they were moving forward. But every distraction eventually faded. Every temporary connection reached a limit. Every conversation ended. And after the noise disappeared, they always found themselves standing in the same silence they had been trying so hard to escape. That silence keeps reminding them of something uncomfortable. You never had to struggle to understand them. You simply understood. You noticed what they never explained. You recognized emotions they never admitted. You saw behind the defenses they believed were impossible to see through. That kind of connection cannot be copied by effort alone. It requires vulnerability. It requires emotional honesty. It requires allowing another person to see the parts we spend years trying to protect, and vulnerability is still the place they fear the most. That fear has trapped them in a painful cycle. They miss what they lost. They long for the depth they once experienced. Yet they still do not fully know how to receive that same depth without becoming afraid. So the conflict continues. Part of them wants closeness. Another part immediately pulls away. One side wants authenticity. The other side wants control. Neither side wins. The tension simply grows stronger. Every passing day reinforces the truth they keep trying to avoid. They had something real. They let it go. Now they cannot recreate it by simply finding someone new. That realization changes everything. Because this is no longer only about missing one person. It has become about understanding what your presence awakened inside them. Something changed while you were in their life. Something they never expected. Something they cannot return to ignoring. Your presence quietly uncovered parts of themselves they had spent years avoiding. Parts that wanted honesty instead of performance. Parts that wanted acceptance instead of constant approval. Parts that wanted peace instead of endless emotional protection. Now your absence forces them to face those same parts alone. And that is far more difficult than they ever imagined. There comes a moment in every emotional journey when distractions stop working. Not slowly, not little by little, almost all at once. The hobbies stop feeling exciting. The conversations become repetitive. Achievements feel strangely empty. Entertainment loses its ability to silence the mind. Eventually, the truth rises back to the surface, not because someone forces it to, because the human mind cannot suppress emotional reality forever. They have reached that point now. Silence no longer feels peaceful. It feels loud. Every quiet moment carries the emotions they postponed. Every memory returns with greater clarity. Every avoided feeling asks to be acknowledged. What comes back is not only memory. It feels like evidence. Evidence of who they became when they were with you. Evidence of who they became after losing you. The difference unsettles them. Because around you something inside them softened, not weaker, more open, not less capable, more genuine, not controlled, more honest. For a brief period, they experienced a version of themselves that felt surprisingly real. At the time, they did not know how valuable that version actually was. Now they cannot stop thinking about it. Sometimes they wonder whether that version disappeared with you. Sometimes they wonder whether it only existed because you were there. That question is more frightening than they admit, Because if the most authentic version of themselves only appeared during your presence, then who are they without it? Questions like that do not simply create sadness, they shake identity itself. They force someone to examine every role they have been playing. They realize they know how to impress people. They know how to adapt. They know how to stay emotionally safe. They know how to perform confidence. They know how to appear unaffected. But they are no longer certain they know who they are beneath all those layers. The version capable of genuine emotional openness only appeared when they stopped pretending, and somehow that only happened naturally with you. Without realizing it, they have been searching for that version of themselves ever since. Many people believe love is only about another person. In reality, love often reveals parts of ourselves we could never reach alone. Sometimes we fall in love not only with another human being, but with the person we become in their presence. That is why this loss feels so confusing. They are not only grieving someone they cared about, they are grieving the person they briefly became. Losing a relationship hurts. Losing access to a part of your own identity hurts even more. People can imagine replacing relationships. Replacing a version of yourself is much harder. That explains why every new beginning feels incomplete. They continue meeting new people. They continue trying to create new bonds. They continue hoping the feeling will eventually return. But something always feels different. The conversations seem forced. The closeness develops too slowly. The emotional safety never arrives naturally. They cannot manufacture authenticity. It either exists or it does not. Little by little, another realization begins to take shape. You did not simply care about them. You allowed them to exist without pretending. They did not need perfect answers. They did not need constant performance. They did not need to earn acceptance every moment. They could simply exist. Now every new connection seems to require the performance all over again. Smile at the right time. Say the right things. Hide the uncomfortable emotions. Protect the vulnerable parts. Repeat the same emotional habits. They have grown tired of performing. Because performance keeps people alive emotionally. Authenticity allows them to truly live. The problem is that authenticity still feels risky to them. It asks them to release control. It asks them to trust. It asks them to believe that someone can know the real version of them without walking away. That belief still feels unfamiliar. Perhaps that is why your presence made them uncomfortable. You could not be predicted. You could not be controlled. Your honesty created freedom. Freedom terrified them. So they walked away from the very thing they secretly wanted. Only later did they understand what they had actually left behind. Regret rarely arrives as one dramatic moment. It enters quietly. A familiar place, a random song, a certain time of day, a memory they did not expect, a sentence someone else says. Suddenly, everything returns. The emotional safety, the understanding, the closeness, the honesty. The depth that once frightened them now feels like the safest place they have ever known. That realization does not bring peace. It creates even greater discomfort. Because they finally understand something they misunderstood from the beginning. They were never overwhelmed by you. They were overwhelmed by what your presence awakened inside them. You revealed emotions they had spent years avoiding. You reflected parts of themselves they did not know how to accept. Instead of growing into that awareness, they escaped from it. Now there is no escape left. They cannot become the person they were before meeting you. That version feels disconnected. It feels incomplete. But becoming someone new requires facing every fear they have avoided for years. Their fear of not being enough. Their dependence on outside validation. Their habit of protecting themselves from vulnerability. Their need to stay emotionally in control. Every defense they once relied upon slowly begins to fall apart. What remains underneath is uncomfortable, but it is real. And truth always feels unfamiliar before it begins to feel freeing. The deepest truth they are finally beginning to face is painfully simple. They did not lose you because you were wrong for them. They lost you because what you represented demanded growth they were not prepared to accept. You reflected a version of themselves that felt honest instead of guarded. You challenged the stories they believed about their own worth. You invited authenticity when they still depended on emotional protection. That invitation felt frightening, so they walked away. Now they understand the contradiction they have been carrying ever since. They wanted something genuine, but they rejected it the moment it required them to become genuine themselves. That contradiction follows them everywhere. Every new relationship reminds them. Every quiet evening reminds them. Every temporary distraction reminds them. Slowly, they are being led toward the one thing they resisted from the very beginning. Responsibility, not responsibility for every outcome. Not responsibility for every painful ending, but responsibility for the choices fear made on their behalf. Because healing cannot truly begin until someone stops asking only what they lost and starts asking what they refuse to face within themselves. And that is the question they can no longer avoid.